Hey there, lovely soul. Welcome back to Noah's Stories. Have you ever met someone who completely changed the way you see the world? Someone whose very presence opened a door you didn't even realize was there? Today, I'll tell you a story about bold dreams, quiet strength, and a love that blossomed in the heart of bustling Chicago. The golden light of dusk spilled across the proud skyscrapers of downtown. On the 38th floor of a gleaming glass tower, Julian Hayes, the creative director of one of the city's leading urban design firms, stood silently before the massive window, his gaze drifting out toward the winding river beyond. At 38, Julian had everything most people dream of: a brilliant career, a name that carried weight, and a charisma that turned heads wherever he went. Yet at this very moment, he felt a quiet hollowness settle deep inside, a sense that no matter how grand the projects were, something vital was still missing. And it was precisely then that fate decided to send her into his life. That fleeting moment, Julian standing in silence before the window, the river stretching quietly in the distance, lasted only seconds, but its echo lingered, carried with him into the next meeting. He turned back to the long conference table, now cluttered with sketches and models, all precise, polished, and lifeless. Julian sifted through the pages, sharp lines, perfect ratios, calculated forms. But none of it spoke to the soul. It felt like looking into a polished shell, glossy on the outside, but hollow within. This wasn't just another project on their portfolio. This was meant to be a landmark, a space to live, work, and connect in the heart of South Loop. The city was evolving, and this building was supposed to help tell its story. But what lay before him looked like a geometry exercise wrapped in expensive glass. Julian sighed, his gaze heavy. "We can't keep going like this," he said quietly but firmly. "I don't want something people walk past. I want something that makes them stop." The room fell silent. 4 firms had already been dismissed. Deadlines were slipping. The city board was growing impatient. But Julian refused to rush a vision that didn't feel right. "Is there anyone else?" he asked, turning to his assistant. "Find someone who dares to think differently, even if they're not on the list, even if we've never worked with them before." Because if this building was truly going to live, it needed a heart. 3 days later, she walked in. Elena Cruz. Not with the flashy confidence typical of high-stakes design pitches. No designer dress, no luxury heels, just a crisp cream suit, her long dark hair tied neatly back, and a gaze that met the room with calm steadiness. Not arrogant, but certainly not afraid. The room was filled with silk ties, luxury watches, and sharp glances. But Elena stood out precisely because she wasn't trying to. There was nothing performative about her. She simply was. "Good afternoon, Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice warm and composed. "I'm Elena Cruz. Apologies for being late. South Chicago traffic at this hour is something else." Julian looked up, and for a fleeting moment, something in him paused. A flicker of curiosity, maybe admiration, or something deeper, not yet named. Without waiting for permission, Elena placed her leather bag on the table, pulling out a neatly bound portfolio and 3 small models. She laid them down with quiet care, as if she was offering not just an idea, but a piece of herself. "I've studied the South Loop site thoroughly," she began, her voice steady, though her eyes sparkled with quiet fire. "Most buildings there are modern, sharp angles, glass and steel. Beautiful, yes, but cold. They don't feel..." She flipped open her drawings. 3 interconnected structures linked by open courtyards, inspired by Spanish colonial forms and the terracotta rooftops of southern neighborhoods. Curved balconies, hand-forted brick walls, and shared green spaces made it feel warm, grounded, alive. This design isn't about form. It's about memory, about culture, about giving people a place to feel like they belong. Then she paused and looked directly at Julian. "To me, architecture doesn't begin with a blueprint, it begins with emotion." Julian said nothing. He had sat through dozens of presentations over the years, brilliant, technical, polished, but none had ever felt quite this honest. In the days that followed the presentation, Julian and Elena found themselves working together almost daily. At first, everything remained strictly professional, fine-tuning technical details, reviewing material samples, crunching costs. But slowly, the meeting stretched longer, not because of inefficiency, but because neither seemed eager to leave. Julian, known for his precision and pragmatism, focused fiercely on numbers and deadlines. Elena, with an artist's heart, kept returning the conversation to experience, to how spaces made people feel. Their differences sparked more than a few heated debates, real debates, unfiltered, passionate. But somewhere between the arguments and the occasional bursts of laughter, a deeper understanding began to grow. One late afternoon, after a long and exhausting site visit, Julian suggested, "How about a walk? There's something I want to show you." Elena hesitated, then nodded. They left the bustling center and wandered down narrow South Chicago streets. The autumn sky was deep and brooding, bare trees casting long shadows across the sidewalks. They didn't talk much, just walked side by side, their footsteps syncing with the quiet pulse of the city. Eventually, they stopped in front of a small cafe, its windows fogged over, warm light spilling onto the street. Julian smiled. "This place? It was part of my childhood." Inside, sitting across from each other with steaming mugs in hand, Julian asked, "Why architecture?" Elena paused, her gaze drifting toward the misty window, watching golden leaves dance in the wind. "When I was little, I used to follow my father to construction sites," she said quietly. "To me, a brick or a plank of wood wasn't just material. It was the beginning of a story." Then she lifted her eyes to meet his. "I learned to imagine homes before they were built. Who would live there, laugh there, love there? And I realized, architecture isn't just a profession, it's a promise." Julian said nothing. In that moment, Elena was no longer just the architect he'd hired. She was the woman quietly challenging everything he thought he knew, with a sincerity that needed no grand words. And deep inside Julian, something began to shift. A week later, Elena received a phone call. She quietly stepped out of the meeting room, and when she returned, something in her eyes had changed. Softer. Worried. "My dad's sick," she said softly, almost in a whisper when they were alone. "I need to go home for a while." Julian didn't hesitate. "I'll come with you." Elena blinked, slightly surprised, but didn't argue. There was something in his gaze, steady, unspoken, that made no impossible to say. 2 days later, they boarded a flight to a small town near the Texas border, where Elena had grown up. No skyscrapers, no city lights, just dusty red roads, low rooftops, and the hum of wind passing through cornfields. Her mother, Lucia, greeted them with a warm hug and a smile as gentle as morning sun. "You must be Julian," she said. "Elena's written about you." Julian chuckled awkwardly, barely getting a word in before being ushered into the kitchen and handed a plate of steaming tamales and homemade cinnamon tea. Everything was so warm, so real, as if he wasn't a guest but a son returning home. That afternoon, he met Mr. Cruz, Elena's father. Though clearly tired, he made the effort to sit up and talk, and somehow these two very different men quickly found common ground in stories of work, craftsmanship, and seeing life through every brick and board. Elena watched from the hallway as her father smiled, truly smiled, for the first time in weeks, and her heart eased. The days passed quickly. Julian woke to roosters crowing, drank coffee from heavy brown mugs, and slowly melted into the rhythm of life there. Neighbors called him the future son-in-law, and kids dragged him outside to draw chalk murals on the patio. One evening, after everyone had gone to bed, Julian sat alone on the porch, gazing up at the star-filled sky, a sight he rarely saw in the city. The breeze was gentle, carrying the scent of earth and dry wood. He closed his eyes for a moment, then looked out into the night. "You belong here," he whispered, as if speaking to Elena though she wasn't near. "And I can't imagine this life without you anymore." That night, for the first time in his life, Julian knew one thing with absolute certainty. He was going to marry her. After spending a few days in Elena's hometown, Julian returned to Chicago, but something within him had shifted. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was subtle, quiet, like the way autumn slowly paints the trees gold without asking for attention. Elena returned to the city a week later. They saw each other at the office again, the same blueprints, the same numbers. but neither mentioned the trip. They didn't have to. Everything was different now. The way they looked at each other, the quiet between them, even their breathing seemed somehow synced. One crisp weekend afternoon, Julian called her. "Are you free? There's a place I want to show you." They met at the entrance of the Riverside Park, once an abandoned rail line, now a tree-lined walkway. The autumn air was cool and soft, leaves drifting gently across the old brick path. They walked in silence, side by side. Julian led her to a quiet open plot near the main project, an expansion site he hadn't shown anyone. There he stopped and turned to her. "Elena," he began, voice low and measured. "At first this project was just work, but since you came into my life, it's become something else. You've made me see the world differently." She didn't respond right away, only met his eyes, steady and calm, as though she'd been waiting for him to say this. "I know we come from different worlds. You're the warmth of open skies and front porches. I'm glass towers and deadlines. But when I'm with you, I don't feel the distance. I just want to be closer." He stepped toward her slowly, slow enough for her to move back if she wanted to. But she didn't. She didn't blink. And when their lips met, it wasn't impulsive or rushed. It was a quiet confirmation that love had begun, unplanned, but right on time. After that afternoon, everything between them remained quiet. No grand declarations, no dramatic gestures, just the soft, certain rhythm of two people falling in love gently, like hearts that had long known each other, now finally speaking the same language. Elena was still the architect whose eyes lit up when talking about terracotta and sunlight courtyards. Julian remained the man of timelines and technicalities. But together they moved in harmony, like the most balanced design, needing no revisions. The project was completed on schedule. Earth-tone buildings stood gracefully connected by sun-drenched courtyards. Curved balconies whispered of Spanish heritage, and stone walkways invited people home. Residents began to move in, and the press praised Elena's design as a voice of community in the heart of a steel metropolis. At the grand opening, Julian stepped up to the podium. Under the flash of cameras and the echo of applause, he smiled and took Elena's hand. "We're calling it Casa Nueva," he announced. "It means new home, not just concrete and glass, but a space to begin again, to belong and to love." The audience stood and clapped. Elena's hand slipped into his, not with trembling, not with pressure, but with a stillness that said, "I'm here, and I choose you." A few weeks later, on a quiet, windless autumn afternoon, Julian brought Elena to a wildflower field tucked behind the development, the same spot she once said was most beautiful when no blueprints got in the way. She didn't know what he carried in his coat, only that he kept looking at her, not nervous, just deeply present. "Elena," he said, "I don't know how many plans will change in the years to come, but one thing I don't want to redesign is you in my life." Then he knelt and pulled out a deep blue velvet box. "Will you be my wife?" She didn't answer right away. She simply stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. "Yes," she whispered, "I'll always be your home." Their wedding came a few months later, held in a small rooftop garden above Casa Nueva, where bougainvillea vines danced in the breeze. No fancy wine, no extravagant dress, just close family and the sound of honest laughter. Julian's mother hugged Elena tight, eyes shining. Elena's father stood quietly beside her, not saying much, just holding her hand, long and steady. There was no need for a grand hall, because that day, love had already received every blessing it ever needed. After their simple but joy-filled wedding, Julian brought Elena back to his penthouse, a space where the city lights stretched endlessly across the skyline and silence was intimate, not empty. After their intimate wedding on the rooftop of Casa Nuevo, Julian brought Elena back to his private penthouse, with floor-to-ceiling windows and the city lights flickering outside like 1,000 silent blessings. They didn't say much as they entered. Elena unclipped her hair. Julian gently placed the bridal bouquet on the table. The air in the elegant space was calm, almost sacred, like the final breath of a long, beautiful day. Elena sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clutching the soft fabric of her dress. Julian approached, ready to speak, but stopped when he caught the hesitation in her eyes. She took a deep breath. "Julian," she began, barely audible. I've never done this before." Julian froze. Silence lingered for a beat. He looked at her, not with doubt, but with genuine surprise. Then slowly his expression softened. "Are you serious?" he asked gently. Elena nodded, her eyes steady but her heartbeat racing loud in her chest. Julian sat beside her, quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, a warm, grateful smile. "Thank you for trusting me with that," he said. "It makes you even more special." He didn't rush. He didn't reach for her right away. He brushed her hair back softly and kissed her forehead, as if guarding something precious. When they lay down together, not rushed, not scripted, just two hearts learning how to meet for the first time. Every breath, every touch, was as gentle as a flower unfolding in the quiet of night. It wasn't a night of wild passion or grand displays. It was a night lit by love, pure, reverent, and exactly on time. And as they drifted to sleep in each other's arms, the wind through the window seemed to lull them into a new chapter, one of things never touched before, now finally beginning. 3 years had passed since they stood hand in hand in that rooftop garden. Now they lived somewhere else, closer to their roots, their memories, and the people who shaped them. Julian and Elena had moved to the small town where she grew up, just a few blocks from her parents' house. No skyscrapers, no bright city lights, just a quiet corner of the world where mornings began with roosters and evenings smelled of rain on soil and wood. The home they lived in was designed by Elena herself, not large but flooded with light. Around it she planted all her favorite flowers, purple bougainvillea by the porch, lavender along the fence, and a patch of white daisies beneath the window where she often sat to draw. Within that home there was a constant sound, the laughter of Lucia, their 2-year-old daughter, with soft curls like clouds and wide brown eyes just like her mother's. Lucia loved to dig in the dirt, doodle on anything she could find, and hum little songs whenever it rained. One quiet rainy morning, Julian sat on a rattan chair by the window, a mug of steaming coffee in hand. Elena was tying Lucia's hair, both of them laughing softly under the warm light of the kitchen. He said nothing, just watched them for a long, still moment. And then his mind drifted back to that crisp morning when she first walked into his boardroom, with steady eyes, a quiet voice, and a courage that spoke louder than any pitch. She didn't just present a design, she changed the course of his life. This is the masterpiece, he thought. Not the building, not the accolades, but this little house, that woman, this child, a life, not perfect, but full. And to Julian, that was the most beautiful thing of all. Thank you so much for staying with Julian and Elena until the very end. If this story touched something in you, even just a little, we'd love to hear from you. Tell us in the comments, what does your own masterpiece look like? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story. Until next time, thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next chapter.